I'm Ryan. I work at the Watershed. Okay. I'm at the Elliott. Okay, yeah. I've been seeing your emails. Yeah. Good to put a face to a name. You're new there, yeah? Yep. Yeah. How you like it? So far, yeah.
You get out. I saw that you said
Fridays. Yeah, I try. Yeah.
I try to get out.
Trying to like pull myself away. It's hard. Like, of course.
You gotta just do it.
Yeah.
You gotta do like everything. You know, like. 22 years, but forever. But I was like, oh, I just gotta get all this. Yeah, go. It's sunny and it's 3 o'clock, and let's go for a cruise somewhere. Even if I don't. So 5:30. I mean, you guys got pretty good spots.
Yeah.
I've been hearing from those good folks that it's like, well, we used to be hundreds of people, and now we have kind of a certain, you know, it's like a pretty small group to fill the space. So, yeah. Maybe those like, come on out. You know, we're always looking for people. Yeah. She's still commuting, I think, for Panda. I know. Just be into a place. Yeah. We have a project where we're trying to figure out. We did a bunch of instrument work. I'm sure it's like the band shared with you already. And so we paused when Elliott was in this turmoil or just pause mode. And so now with things we're starting to try that.
We'll give it just a few more minutes and then we'll get started. Thank you all for being here.
Yeah. She runs them all. Yeah. Research on.
Yeah, and even the. We should not get caught. Project base. It's like, of course, you can branch it all and do a lot with it.
Yeah.
Sometimes we can.
Yeah.
On to the next one. What do I gotta do?
Yeah. Yeah, remember to have a passion with you folks.
Yeah. Because I think Amy's on it. Right. You wanted?
Pretty good one for the game. Apparently playing soccer and baseball at the same time. So she can't practice from 5 to 6:30 on Monday and Thursday.
If you don't want them, you just.
Kyle has his practice on Tuesday and Thursday from 5:30
Or
to 7.
like-
And he can't do other days. He has to do first days. And then. It really.
Change it all.
Change it all for one kid. And it's like try and change the kid to a different team.
Potential, but the problem there is that now I need to tell some other kid that's on another team that they're like, yeah, I'm with my friend Billy that. Oh, that team. I've got some of those right now where I'm like.
Show up to the games, I guess. You can't even make it to the game because you're playing soccer at the same time.
Yeah, and yours will be sporadic week, like. Yeah, that's a challenge. It's kind of a choice.
And I got another kid that's getting us to practice. We can find out whatever that is.
It's through us, but like level of those in that group. Yeah. At least one hand and then the next one starts. We're little league coach now. You know. Recruited.
Right. So we are just about at time and I want to welcome everybody. Thank you all for joining us. I am Tasha Davison. I'm the Associate Professor of Forestry and Natural Resources here at Southwestern Oregon Community College. And we have a group of panelists up here that we're going to go through some questions. And let's go ahead and just kick it off. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for those that are sitting in the audience joining us, both here and in Zoom land, live stream land. Thank you all for participating. Really appreciate it. So please share a little about yourself and your role in your organization. We'll just kind of maybe go down the row, whichever direction. And if you guys are okay using the mic.
Hi, is it on? Yeah, I have to talk close to it. My name's Alice Yates. I'm the stewardship coordinator at South Slough Reserve. A little bit about who I am and how I got here and, you know, what I do at the reserve. I've been looking at, measuring, monitoring, thinking about plants and how they interact in trees and how they interact with humans and the environment and animals and other plants for my entire life. And so that has led me to pursue a doctorate in plant ecology and then get a job at the South Slough Reserve as stewardship coordinator. So there I oversee any management and monitoring in the upland plant communities. So that's mostly forest at South Slough, but we do have some wetland, perch wetlands and bogs there. And then I also see other restoration work in wetlands and invasive species management and work with our community to really kind of understand how people connect with this amazing place that we live in. So that's why I'm here.
Hi, my name's Ryan Bombush. I am the research coordinator for the Elliott State Research Forest. As a research forest, it's all relatively new, despite the Elliott having been around for decades. I've been in the role since October. Everyone else on staff was essentially hired last year, and I just moved down to the community in the end of the last year. My role is right now kind of fostering research partnerships to bring researchers from other institutions into the Elliott, and then do that in, you know, supporting harvests and research on the Elliott.
Good evening. My name is Dan Draper. I'm a restoration project manager for the Coos Watershed Association. I've been with the association for about 22 years now. I started as a graduate from Southwestern here in 2004. A lot of the work I do right now as my job is working with lowland agricultural landowners and also working with private timber companies, the Elliott folks, in doing restoration work. So some of that is in-stream work, some of that's riparian focus, plant community stuff and lowland streams, kind of a variety. When we're up in the forest, a lot of it is doing in-stream, you know, putting large wood back in the creek, looking at fish passage on culverts, some other things, road improvement projects too. So partnering with these folks a lot of the time to do the restoration work that we do.
How's it going? My name's Chris Seabrass. I work for Coos Forest Protective Association out of Coos Bay. I'm a fire warden there. I've worked for CFPA for 15 years now. Kind of my main thing is wildland fire and how it relates to these guys. And do a lot of industrial fire inspections with the landowners and the local loggers, and a lot of the smoke management stuff at CFPA for slash burning.
Hey, my name's Lucas Green. I'm a silviculture forester with Weyerhaeuser. I've been working down here for 13 years, just about. So I do a lot of project management, you know, with things like tree planting, pre-commercial thinning, you know, vegetation management, kind of just overseeing things, making sure that, you know, our trees stay healthy and keep growing for, you know, all the future rotations out there, you know, for 20, 30, 40 years, make sure things are growing for, you know, 100 plus years. And we can keep doing this forever.
Thank you for all your introductions. So our first question. So how can we implement harvesting techniques while maintaining forest structure and biodiversity? So whoever wants to kick us off here.
So I guess I can go. You know, there's many different harvest methods out there. You know, not everything has to necessarily be clear cuts. You know, you can do, you know, different thinning timings, multiple thinning entries. And that allows you to, you know, create those different levels of, you know, stand structure. So you can have, you know, 25-year-old trees, 35, 45, you know, 70-year-old timber out there on site. You know, it all kind of just depends on what your, you know, management strategy is. You know, private timber, you know, we're in the business of, you know, generating revenue. So, you know, we're out there creating clear cuts, you know, getting those openings and, you know, going for more of the clear cut, but, you know, different strategies you can, you know, create those different stand structures to be able to get, you know, the different biodiversity on, you know, different acres out there. And so, you know, there's just a lot of different techniques to be able to achieve that.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think also within stands, you can add some complexity using similar techniques that we're just talking about. So a technique called variable density thinning. So this is where you can have sections of your forest that is thin to a certain density, like in a conventional thinning harvest. But then you can also have sections that are opened up to create gaps for wildlife, because there's a lot of benefit for having these sort of pockets of warmer area. They promote understory shrub species, which are really important for pollinators. And so things like huckleberry don't flower in these dense understory forests, but if you have these sort of pockets of gaps within your forest, you get those flowers coming on your huckleberry, and then you get your pollinators sort of entering the forest. And then you can leave different areas. So it's this variable density thinning has these gap areas mimicking a large tree that's fallen down in the forest and the benefits that brings. And then these areas of dense forest, pockets of dense forest, areas where you're thinning. And so when you're sort of going in and taking your timber harvest, there can be this variability in your forest, and that will promote different benefits for wildlife and different plant species, understory species as well. And I know that, you know, the Elliott is sort of interested in like different complexities of forest management.
Yeah, just about any question we could ask tonight of like, what's the best way to do something with forests? The Elliott's intending to like do research on that to see like what works really well in our region. We don't have like unlimited space to pursue those questions, but we are looking at ways of doing different management prescriptions and different compositions across the Elliott to see what works best. So we're going to be implementing intensive regen harvest, essentially going out clear cutting, and then pairing those with equal amounts of reserve areas where we're either not harvesting or we're just going in to do some sort of restoration treatment in those stands, seeing how those compare to, say, more ecological forestry where you do variable density thinning to achieve different stand structure with different biodiversity outcomes.
And maybe along those same lines, this segues nicely to our next question. So how should we measure ecosystem health? And what techniques then work best to protect wildlife habitats and water quality?
I'll jump on it. Yeah, I'll give a very unsatisfying answer of like, it depends on what you want to measure. And like the idea of ecosystem health, my background's in wildlife management and conservation, but this idea of ecosystem health is like not great in my opinion. It's kind of a loaded term, and it just means whatever somebody wants it to mean oftentimes. Like if you ask a wildlife biologist, they're going to say, oh, like, you know, it can be even more specific, like an ornithologist, they're going to say, oh, you're going to have a lot of avian diversity out there. You ask a fisheries biologist, they're going to say, oh, ecosystem health means you're going to get like a lot of coho salmon spawning. You ask a silviculturalist, they're going to probably give you a different answer. It really just comes down to what the outcomes you want of that forest really are.
Thank you. Yep. Yep. And I think too that for students, right, that have taken classes, we always talk about all the cogs and wheels, right, in good working order, all the pieces. And so I think having that kind of overview perception is really valuable in this field of study in general. So what's working best to promote climate resilience, and what stands in the way of putting those solutions into practice? Does anyone have any thoughts on that one?
I think with some of the work we do in the restoration world, which is a little different than just the upland slopes, you know, more recently these questions come out of resiliency and, well, you know, your project's great, but how do you find that next level for climate change or rising sea level or these other things? And probably need to just hold it closer. There we go. A lot of times it's just that, you know, but kind of with the biodiversity is that sometimes I get grant dollars, I do a project, I'm aiming for these expectations for the landowner, for their land use goals. And with biodiversity, you can do just a few more things to trigger onto a few other species. So, you know, we're so coho driven in the world that I live in. That's where our dollars come and our funding comes from. So it's really our focus. Let's get fish passage. Let's get in-stream habitat. Let's work on the little adjacent riparian areas. But oftentimes, you know, this gets more to kind of biodiversity is what are the little things we can do for pollinators? What are the little things we can do for, you know, even waterfowl? Sometimes we're focusing on in-stream work and fish and amphibians and turtles and things, and it's like, well, all of what we're doing is helping these other species, and maybe there's small tweaks that we can do within our restoration project to kind of to take that another step farther. And so it's oftentimes a small percentage of money. You know, if we have let's say a $500,000 or $1 million project all in all with a landowner, you're probably often talking about 10 or 20 or 30,000 to help out a whole suite of other species that you're getting really close and you're moving the needle, but a few small shifts can really move the needle for these other species. And that's something that we've been doing for 20 years is just, you know, it's driven by salmon. Those are the dollars that we get, but we're starting to think, slow down a little bit and back up a step and figure out how do we add additional stuff to what we do to make sure that we're hitting on the other things. And it's hard to climate change, believe it or not, it's happening. Sea levels coming up. Some of the recent flooding that we had is really pushing some of the tides. So we had the king tides, and on top of that, we had storm surge. And so in places where we didn't always see quite as much, we're seeing a little more. On a project I'm working on the Coal Bank area, so we're going to potentially raise a levee. Well, the impacts of that's going to have adjacent where you're not raising. And so, yeah, we're going to protect some resources over here, but now we're pushing more water and storm surge and other things onto other parcels. So it's not a perfect science. And like, kind of like what you were talking about, depends on the interest or the person or the funder or the landowner, who they represent. It can kind of drive that a little bit too.
From a wildland fire side, some of the things we're doing for some resiliency is, you know, a lot of these wildland fires are starting to get into the urban interface communities. So we've been searching and seeking out grants so we can do fuels reductions around homes and make the communities a little more resilient towards wildland fires as they come out of these forest lands and into the communities.
And, you know, forestry wise, some things that we work on is, you know, pre-commercial thinning. So just reducing the amount of trees we have in some of these younger stands, thin them out, get them to a healthier tree per acre, you know, kind of breaks up that, you know, if there were to be a fire sort of situation, you know, makes them a little bit healthier. And then the other thing is just planting a more diverse mix of species out there. You know, not to where it's just all Doug fir, get some grand fir, some western red cedar, you know, just other native conifer species and, you know, getting that spread out across the landscape, you know, will help with that wildfire resiliency, you know, climate change sort of thing. You know, the biggest factor against that is just, you know, it costs money to do pre-commercial thinning. You don't see any, you know, value in it really. And then, you know, planting alternate species, there's not as much value in some of those. as there is in the Douglas fir. So that kind of goes against, planting those, but makes for a healthier forest in the long run.
And it sounds like we're kind of transitioning into the next question anyway, right? That this, given natural disturbances like wildfire and insect infestations, what can we do to support and improve forest resilience?
Yeah, so just that same thing. We've been planting multiple species along the road edges to help prevent disease and insect infestation. So, down here on the South Coast, there's black stain. It's a root disease. And that really impacts Douglas fir. So if you see a lot of brown dying Douglas fir down here, that's got that black stain root fungus. And so it's highly susceptible in Douglas fir. Grand fir doesn't get it at all. So we've been going around planting grand fir along the road edges. So that way future rotations should help slow it down. Those road trees get stressed out throughout the year. So we're hoping that, that can kind of help slow down the impact on those trees there, kind of prevent the spread of those insect infestations and disease spreading.
Yeah, that's a loaded question, I guess, from a fire aspect. The insect infestation, the tree diseases, those all affect fire containment, right? It makes our job a lot harder. So these managed forests for us are a huge benefit. You got healthy stands of trees. A lot of these big timber companies have well-roaded areas that help us create fire breaks. They help us catch fire on the roads. And a lot of these unmanaged stands have a lot of dead trees, a lot of snags. They pose a lot of risk to our firefighters that go down into these places to try to mitigate and minimize impact on the landscape. So for us, a managed forest works a lot better. It's a lot safer for us. So yeah.
So I've got a couple of things I think around climate resilience in forests, and we talked a little bit about diversity of the plants that we're planting, but also genetic diversity. So when we lose, individual plants from an area and then kind of replant with the same stock, we're sort of bottlenecking our genetic diversity. And it means that these plants that are really closely related to each other can be more susceptible to disease or stresses from climate change. And so introducing genetic variability into our plantings is a really good idea, I think, in terms of some resilience with that. And so a classic example in our area is Port Orford cedar. We saw a lot of Port Orford cedars, a lot of dead snags out there on the landscape because of the Phytophthora, the root rot. And then some fantastic genetic research was done trying to isolate which of the genetic strains are resistant to these disease and this pathogen, and then sort of growing those out and re-establishing them on the landscape and making sure that when you do this process, you actually still have some genetic diversity and variability in there for future problems that might come up. And the other thing, just on wildfire, I have to advocate for beavers because there's a lot of research on how beaver wetlands and beaver streams can actually provide refugia for fires and even really large dam replacing fires. They provide this space that trees are able to survive these fire events and then restock the area. And in some cases, depending on the direction of the fire and the orientation of the wetlands, they can be these natural fire breaks in there as well. So go beavers. Sorry, that wasn't a university thing. Go Beavs. Okay. I have no affiliation with.
So our next question is how can timber harvesting be reconciled with the need for forests to act as robust carbon sinks and mitigate climate change?
I'll get us started and other people can jump in. One thing is a type of forest that a lot of people don't really know about in Oregon, which is tidal forested swamp. These are areas that have been lost from Oregon. Around 95% of tidal forested swamp has been lost from Oregon, and recent research came out that these are really high carbon sequestering habitat types, and so they actually sequester more carbon than upland forests. So re-establishing a certain forest type in these actual wetlands where the timber practices really aren't harvesting anymore, that could be restoring some of these forest types to an area that's not commercially viable for timber production, could really have a great benefit on carbon sequestration. And so that's just kind of reintroducing a habitat type that was lost, and that doesn't take away from timber production in the uplands.
We can move along if you guys want. Yeah. So what is the best way to balance economic need for timber with long-term ecological impacts, such as habitat loss and soil erosion?
Yeah, again, that's exactly what we were trying to do at the Elliott is maintain a stable timber production volume year over year, while also trying to figure out which way, whether it's pairing conservation reserves with equal amounts of intensive harvests, or spreading that out, doing more extensive harvesting where you leave a lot of trees behind.
I think some of it too just comes down to, utilizing the best methods for timber harvesting during the right season. So, when you got a real rainy season, assessing the landscape that you're on, and, looking at your soil types and where you're at, and, even if it's a flat unit, relatively, gentle ground, maybe not doing that one in the winter with ground-based equipment, because you're going to have a lot of soil compaction. You're going to create some, runoff and have, water quality issues. And so, bump that unit into the summertime and, maybe go do some, cable harvesting and things like that. And, you'll end up with better ecological impacts, and, your water quality goes up because you're not creating any sediment runoff and things like that. So just making sure you're balancing the right, equipment for your harvesting methods in the right seasons.
Anyone else for that one? We'll move along. Okay. So how can landowners promote biodiversity, water quality, and climate resilience in meaningful and economically sustainable ways? So any landowner.
The Watershed itself doesn't own land. So unlike some of these folks that represent managers of, the Elliott or Weyerhaeuser, we work with voluntary restoration. So these individuals have a need that's maybe a failing tide gate. Maybe they purchase some land that's in the upland and they want to restore it. They want to see it get back to something. It's really understanding what these individuals, how they're currently using the land, and then where they want to head to with that land. So when I'm developing a project, I really have to see, I need to really understand what they're using, what the limitations are to the landscape based on, usually they come to us because there's a problem. There's a culvert that's failing. There's, while beavers are good, sometimes they're like, these beavers, I got to do something with them. And we try to find a happy medium where it works together. But it's really about understanding the private landowner, what they need, and then how do we set a project up that doesn't just give you 5 and 10 years of success, but has some trajectory where you're out 20 to 50 years, it's still functioning. You lose some wood deteriorates. If you don't get new regrowth that's falling in the creek, projects like mine, oftentimes these streams were pushed to the side of the bank. If we are able to remove the creek back to where it once was, now you have a buffer that needs to grow 50 years before something might fall in. So natural recruitment takes quite a while. A lot of times we're sticking wood in the side of the stream. We're creating some roughness, trying to get pools that are little less, getting them more complex. So having some edge habitat, having some deep pockets, giving the fish and other species a place to kind of get in there and hide. I don't know if I got to all of it, but
I can repeat the question. So, how can landowners promote biodiversity, water quality, and climate resilience? Yes, there's multiple parts to that question.
And I know from like ODF side, they create a bunch of stuff with the Forest Practice Act, you know, with the stream buffers, how big the stream buffers can be to protect some of these watersheds, road maintenance, so they don't have so much runoff into the streams and stuff like that. So there are laws in place through ODF and the state that help reduce that impact on the landscape.
Our next question, what are the impacts of increasing wood product demand on deforestation rates? And how do we ensure our forests remain sustainable for future generations?
So at least as far as the state of Oregon, the way that zoning laws here work, when you have timberland that is zoned as, you know, harvestable, productive timberland, it has to stay, you know, as harvestable timberland. It's almost impossible to convert that over to anything else. So, you know, and then with that, there's the, you know, forest practices. So within 2 years, you have to replant it no matter what. You know, as most private industry, you know, we're trying to get back in there as quick as possible to get that replanted, because at the end of the day, we're here to generate revenue and keep the forest healthy. So, you know, getting back in there as fast as possible is kind of the key. And so, you know, in all reality, you know, if we have 200,000 acres of timberland, it's 200,000 acres of timberland. You know, Weyerhaeuser's been in the business of doing this for the last 125 years, and we haven't lost any, you know, forest cover in that time. So at least as far as private timber industry, you know, we're going to keep doing the same thing going forward. You know, as far as other countries' concerns, you know, if they enacted the same kind of replanting laws, it would, you know, help prevent from, you know, deforestation happening.
Yeah, I kind of echo what Luke said there. I don't think these landowners are trying to deforest their own land, right? They're trying to be the best stewards of their land as they can be, so they can ensure that their business goes on into the future for the next generations. I think some of your biggest deforestation risk would probably be from wildfire, you know, covering multiple thousands of acres of ground and making sure these stewards of this land and these private landowners go in and reforest and salvage what they can and help return it back to what it was before a fire came through.
I think sometimes some of the stuff we see it with smaller woodland owners where they own 10 acres, 20 acres. You know, when you have 200,000 acres, you're trying to get this piece going so you can cut the next piece and move on. I think sometimes you do see where these individuals that have smaller parcels, if I'm logging it this year, my kid might log it when he's 40, right? I'm probably not going to necessarily log it again if I only have 10 or 20 acres. And so I think we see smaller pieces, but areas where you probably enforcement's hard in all of our world. You know, we all have to follow permits and do the things we do, but there's only so many people enforcing all the rules. And so I think when we see actions like that, sometimes it's working with that landowner. I'm non-regulatory, so I could say, hey, the upland stuff isn't always what we deal with, but have you thought about this? Have you replanted it? You probably were supposed to be there within a couple of years. How do we get some mix back into that? And so I think that's where I see more of they get in, they harvest, they only own 10 acres, they cut 8 of them, and maybe it doesn't get planted to the density or the species diversity that it once was. And so that's, I think these guys that are doing it for a living, or, you know, to make, you know, that they need those trees to get in. That way, 45 years later, they're grabbing them again. Smaller woodland guys will, I think, maybe miss the mark on the reforestation a little bit.
So let's maybe transition to some law and policy implication questions. So what are some good examples of governance that strikes a balance between timber demand and ecological stewardship, and how can they be improved?
I'll touch base real quick. So the new private forest accords, there was a lot of people at the table, from agency to timber companies and other stuff. I've done a lot of fish presence work on buffer to kind of figure out where the fish use is going to be in a stream. That kind of data goes to the state. It also goes back to the timber companies who hired us at times, so they can figure out where their RMAs and their buffers are going to be. I didn't realize until probably 10 years ago in a meeting that I went to, the old private forest accords from the 90s, 80s, 90s, you know, even though there was a 100-foot buffer, there was a certain amount of cut that could happen within the first, you know, from 100 down to 60, I think it is. And then another amount that could go down to here. So it was based on basal area, and kind of, as long as you could get the trees in a certain area, you could kind of cut in and out and grab some trees. The new private forest accords really is setting that at 100 feet if there's no fish, and 110 if there is fish. Now that changes some when you get farther up in the headwaters, but that changed where timber companies were at the table, agencies came together, really is going to put a lot of protection into streams and rivers and stuff that we don't ever see. When we do a stream remeander where we move the creek, sometimes the timber company wins, because I took a creek that was over here and they own the forest on the edge, and I moved it in the middle of the field, and now they could harvest all of that because it's no longer within 100 feet. And sometimes they lose because we are remeandering it over there. So I don't always just go, let's move the creek because the landowner's willing. We also have some shade at some point. So that change in the private forest accord in the last little bit has made leaps and bounds. I'm sure these guys have to fight with it on their side of things more than I do. But it makes the decision a lot easier when I'm doing restoration work, because we know that things are going to get buffered, rather than, man, they're going to log this whole thing, sediment's going to be coming down, and I'm building a pond that's going to fill with sediment. So it's a little different maybe in the world I live, but I do feel like that private forest accord has taken us a step in the right direction for setting up some of those buffers.
Folks.
Yeah, I also think it sets some clear harvest rules as well. You know, it limits clear cut size, sets replanting requirements, how many trees per acre you need to have when you replant. Back to the stream buffers, you know, it sets a precedence for stream buffers, for fish and the habitat. And, you know, ODF is out there, they monitor, they inspect all these landowners and making sure they're kind of in compliance with all these rules that they have set forth. So that's what I got from my side.
Anyone else on thoughts? Good governance? No? Okay. So how can we best combine local ecological knowledge with national forest management plans to improve outcomes?
Sure, I don't know if I have a perfect answer for that. So how do we combine local knowledge of our ecological systems here on a national scale or broader? So the South Slough National Estuarine Research Reserve is one of 30 around the country. And so we have reserves in Hawaii and Alaska and Puerto Rico, a lot on the East Coast, and then West Coast. We're the only one in Oregon here. So my role at the reserve is, as I said, to understand and manage and monitor the forests in our reserve. But I also am on a working group that looks at national forests as well. And so we're kind of trying to understand how these forests are changing at a national level, how when we monitor something here at the reserve, how that connects with other places in the nation, so we can better understand impacts of climate and that. And so if you're thinking about that local scale, sort of managing at the local scale, but also informing some larger understanding of how we're doing as a nation, I think is really important. And then, you know, locally working, when I came here, I'm from Australia, I came to this job, I did not know these forests, you know, I came here as an outsider. And so the way that I learned about the forest here is providing and making connections with our community and talking with folks at the tribes and talking with other people on this panel and with foresters, and OSU Extension Forestry Program was a huge help. So all that local knowledge that I listened to and I talked to really helped inform me on how to best manage South Slough Reserve's forests, and then bringing that knowledge out to a larger community and the national scale as well.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I'd really like to know how we use local ecological knowledge to inform local forest management, and get that integrated in, which is something we're pursuing at the Elliott. At the same time, some of our charge is to do research on the Elliott that is globally relevant. So I think one of the things in my role as a research coordinator, like I really want to use the Elliott to demonstrate how we can integrate local knowledge from many different communities in better managing forests for those communities themselves, and then using that as a demonstration so that other forests can implement those same frameworks of community engagement.
I think some of the work that we do, we end up in silos. So Watershed Council here may be doing some really cool stuff, but we're moving at such a pace that it's hard to share that even with our neighbors at 10 Mile or Coquille. I can imagine the timber industry is similar in the sense of what's working well and what's not working well. Locally, it was kind of funny that you said that, because I feel like even at our smaller level, it's not, we should be learning from outside the whole state, the country, but sometimes we're failing just to make connections with the guy next door and the neighbor next door, and explain what didn't work or explain what is working well. And so we are constantly struggling with that. We have meetings, we do a lot of that. I'm in more meetings than I want to be, but that's where we're going to have the sharing of these lessons learned with other agencies, with other watershed councils. So.
Also at the reserve, so we are a research reserve, but we do have an education department. We have a training and engagement focus as well. So part of the work that we do at the reserve is actually to provide training opportunities for practitioners that are doing these work. And we've had people come from Alaska, people come from Washington, California to the reserve to learn from us and from our partners and the experts in our area, and providing that information out, and they're going to those areas and implementing that knowledge base there as well. So I think like identifying the data gaps and the research that we need, trying to find the answers as best we can, and then disseminating that out through these sort of training opportunities and outreach opportunities is important.
Yes. Yes to education. More education, please. And I think it's something that I'm always reminding students of, networking, right? That's part of it too, is being able to go and like meet folks in other areas and share that knowledge, share that information is really important. So I want to ask this to all of you. Hopefully each person maybe can have a chance to respond to this question, because we're making good time. So we should have enough time for each person kind of to weigh in on this one. When balancing timber production and ecosystem health, what do you feel are examples of best practices from this evening's discussion? Where do you feel improvements could be made and why? And again, as a note, right, these questions can apply either to your individual positions in terms of like your organization, or it could be something more broadly, just to forestry, natural resources more broadly.
I've heard a few times people talk about objectives. What are your objectives? Are you really trying to improve fish habitat? Are you trying to reduce fire risk? So what are you trying to do in your forest? And I think the thing is, these forests are so complex, and because they're so complex, they provide so many benefits for us. And no matter what role or job we have, everyone that I ask, whether or not you're lining up, cutting in the forest or cruising, or if you're studying fish or whatever, the reason that you're out there is because you love being out there. You love that space and you love being in the forest. And I think that's an indication of like one of the benefits that forest gives us is the human connection. And so these complex systems provide a lot of benefits, from clean air, clean water, human enjoyment of a space, and benefits that come with that. And so I think that in general, I don't know if this is answering your question, but in general, thinking about these systems as a whole and how we can manage for multiple benefits of them. And if that's balancing timber production and harvest with ecological benefits, social benefits, community benefits, I think it's just really important to think about those really complex systems and multiple benefits.
Yeah, taking it kind of like a more broad general sense, I'd say the important thing is listening. That can be the best practice. Like everybody up here on this panel with me has very different perspectives about what they think would be good management for the forest, or from their background, their experiences. I think of like the risk that snags pose to fires on the landscape, but there's also like incredible biological value to having snags out there. But at the same time, that needs to be recognized that, if the forest goes up in smoke, there's not much biological value to anything that was living there before. So just being able to talk with people about, from different perspectives, different backgrounds, with different priorities or objectives for the forest, I think is a best practice in managing forests.
I think for me, something that kind of strikes back, the Watershed Association, the Coos Watershed, has been around for about 30 years now. Weyerhaeuser's been a partner or on our board from day one. And in the beginning, it was kind of like we would go do restoration work over here, and they were maybe having a heavy harvest on this main line or on this road over here. And we probably did that for the better part of 10 or 15 years, where they said, sure, you can do restoration. Let us know where you're going. And then probably in the last 10 years, maybe a little more, we started going, well, where are you going to harvest in the next 5 years? And so they would say, oh, we're really going to have to, this 4,000 line, we're going to be over here for the next, 8 years. And so now we're in a way where that communication and that just listening and hearing where they're going, now we're going in there and we're doing in-stream work for 4 or 5 miles. We're working with them to get a little bit of the funding to do road improvement projects to meet BMPs. And so we're getting in, instead of just doing restoration out of opportunistic, we're getting in there and kind of maybe getting ahead of the harvest and the impacts that we'll have based on heavy hauling and clear cutting and harvest. And hopefully, our geology around here is pretty soft sand, Tyee sandstone. If I can't put a project together where I'm grabbing that gravel or that cobble pretty quick, if it moves down a mile, it turns into powder that ends up in the bay. So working with timber companies, working with the Elliott and folks to figure out, you're going to have big impacts over here in 10 years. How do I get in there at year 2 to 5 and do something? Really gives us an opportunity to do that. And I think for some of my lowland projects where I'm working in agricultural lands, the uplands are all forests. Lucas and I have a project in Kentucky right now where I need some root wads. I need like 100 of them. And so I reached out the other day and said, hey, are you guys going to harvest anywhere around there? Are you building roads? Do you need landings? Can part of the watershed dollars that we get help build part of that? And then in exchange, either they're providing in kind or we're purchasing some of these root wad logs that we need for the fish stuff. So I think it was easy when we were in the forest and we kind of aligned with that. But I think as I do more of the stuff in the lowlands with the ag landowners, I need to remember who the partners are or who those adjacent landowners are, and see how we incorporate. Sometimes it's the county road department has a culvert that's failing and I'm working in here in the pasture, but could I just expand to the left and take a 24-inch culvert that now is a 7-footer that I could have just kept doing my project with the landowner that wants to do something, but instead we add this piece, and the county road department, when that thing finally fills and floods and cracks, and like, it's got to be catastrophic to be able to upgrade things. So oftentimes we're able to step in and say, what if I bought all the rock and bought the pipe? Could you guys put it in? And they go, absolutely. So it's those types of things, and just thinking a little bit more than just where you're sitting, and trying to connect to the adjacent landowners, I think, a little bit.
Yeah, so coming from more of a fire aspect, I'm not really in the business of timber production per se, but ecosystem health. You know, a green forest is better than a black forest, right? I think we can all agree on that. So some of the stuff that the Oregon Forest Practice Act really brings in for us, you know, the clear cut sides. We don't have just giant endless clear cuts anymore. I think really helps us. The access, I've spoke to that a lot. Something that helps us in the end is working really closely with these landowners, making sure that we know what's going on. I know I can call Luke at any time and figure out anything that's going on Weyerhaeuser. And, you know, it doesn't matter how big of a landowner you are. I feel like eventually at some point, fire could impact your land, right? I've fought fire on Elliott. I've fought fire on South Slough and Weyerhaeuser. So all these landowners here, I've really, I've worked on their ground before. You know, something that I haven't really touched on large fires. We have resource advisors that go out, and we have these values at risk, whether they be human life, homes and property, or, you know, wildlife, archaeology, streams, fish, all that. So we have these people that go out, and they have all these maps, and they know where all these cultural sites are, whether it's the tribes or some of the local wildlife biologists, the archaeologists. So we work really closely with them on fires to help keep those natural resources around. And you know, sometimes it really sucks when you're trying to really get something done, and it's like, oh, hold on. But in the long run, you know, to preserve all that stuff that we have out there on the landscape in our history, it's important to really have those folks out there and help us out and be able to maintain those resources that we still have. So I think that's a big part of our success as well.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Dan stole a lot of my thunder there talking about working with other agencies and things like that. But, you know, for us, it's utilizing a lot of the experts and things. You know, within Weyerhaeuser, we have a lot of, you know, biologists and engineers and soil scientists and research folks and things like that. And so it's, you know, utilizing their expertise and making sure that, you know, we're harvesting the right units and, you know, looking at the soil types and making sure the forest is healthy and things like that. And then, you know, when we can work with the watershed to, you know, help enhance the streams for fish habitat and, you know, get that restored back to, you know, what it was, you know, early 1900s, 1800s, whatever, you know, try and get that structure back in there to, you know, help with that. Because I think at the end of the day, no matter what, you know, who we work for, whatever, I think the goal is kind of the same thing here, that, you know, we all keep the environment healthy, because, you know, we're all out there recreating, you know, and we're trying to keep it healthy for, you know, our kids, their kids, and future generations. And so, you know, no matter what the company's goal is, you know, at the end of the day, we're all trying to, you know, keep a healthy environment and, you know, healthy forest and habitat out there.
Yeah, thank you all for your answers. Are there any final thoughts you want to share with us? So again, we'll just maybe go down the line and each person, if you're willing to share final thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, not every acre has to be kept in, harvestable timber. Obviously, as a private landowner, we want to harvest timber and generate revenue. But with that, we have acres that are, kept in marbled murrelet habitat and owl habitat and fish buffers and things like that. That's okay because, like I said, at the end of the day, we want a healthy ecosystem. We want healthy, productive forests, and you got to have some acres out there for the animals to live in, and in turn we get to generate revenue and do our thing, and we want healthy forests, and so to be able to keep doing that and keep things productive, and that's just the way that it's got to be. But to just have a healthy forest is a good thing, and yeah.
Yeah, our main goal is to keep them small. So I think working with these landowners, making sure we have healthy forests is going to be key to that success. We want to see these guys and these timber companies be successful, but we want to help them be successful as well, So we do a lot of industrial fire inspections, make sure the loggers are being safe, doing their stuff they're supposed to be doing to mitigate fire hazards on the landscape, and just keeping everybody fire safe. So
For me, as kind of the non-harvest individual, I think it's just important for us to not to share, right? To do what we're doing tonight, to kind of understand a little bit more of each of these people's worlds and my world, and then see where there's overlap. Like I was saying, the biodiversity, it's really small pushes and small dollars that could drive a whole lot of other stuff. And so we have to slow down a little bit and not just stick to the status quo and how we've logged or how we've done restoration. And then it's all, get the fish in there and that'll be fine. But really continually learning and understanding what it is we're doing and kind of how we can make tweaks in our day-to-day or our operation, to get more out of it, to get the environment to rebound to where it once was. Not everything can be perfect and everything can get back to what it historically was, but that doesn't mean that a small project that's 3 acres doesn't matter if you only want the 100-acre projects. So it just for my job, just continuing to learn how these guys are impacting things and how I can work aside with them and put that into a project. How I can expand my projects sometimes and incorporate those individuals and give them some benefits, to the same extent. These guys might not be upgrading roads in the Elliott or other things, but hey, I'm going to be hauling, some logs down the stream and there's 3 miles of the 2300 road. And I was like, well, why wouldn't I upgrade that road before we haul those trees down there? So just thinking outside the box and probably just talking and seeing what they need and what do I need, and listening to landowners. So those types of things are pretty important. I think we get used to what we're doing and we kind of just keep doing it. So challenging ourselves to be a little more open to that.
Yeah, I could pretty much reiterate everything you said there. Yeah, as a scientist on a research forest, I just see it as endless questions that could be answered. But it really comes down to like talking with resource users and managers and the communities to find out what the priorities are and what questions are left out there to be answered. And a lot of people look at science as just a collection of facts that are there and static, but really they're, as values change, as climates change, as the landscapes change, the way we manage them to achieve different objectives and support the environment in different ways, that changes and that constantly needs to be updated and looked at. And, we can get into a paradigm of, implementing some practice that we think is best, but that may have been best under one set of values that has changed over decades. So going back and constantly reassessing how we're using and managing the landscape, I think is really valuable.
I guess my final thoughts are that maybe I challenge you all to go out and sort of experience some of these places in Oregon and think about what you appreciate about them and what, what these areas really mean to you and how you value them and what you see as being incredible about this amazing, beautiful place that we live in here in Oregon and the habitats and the forests that we have here. And I think what I appreciate is a lot of people on this stage have really helped in so many different ways, and just sharing tonight is, I think, really helpful as well. So communicating about this, talking about it, but then a lot of these folks have come out and helped me on projects, helped with fire prevention and fire stopping, and I have some news that I would really like to start lighting a few fires occasionally, like to managing the landscape with a new tool that's very, very old. So working together in different ways as we move forward with our management.
Yeah, thank you all so much. And I actually have one more question for anybody. I know it's not on our list, but what would you guys recommend to a student who, is exploring this area, any of these fields of study in any of your areas? What would be maybe a piece of advice you might give to a prospective student that's interested in getting into forestry and natural resources more broadly?
Come and help me do some field work, and you can decide if you love it or you hate it.
I would say check out a professional society that aligns with your interests. For me, being a wildlife biologist, the Wildlife Society was crucial in my development.
I'd say for me is challenge yourself to be uncomfortable. Go do more things. Go check out different things. When we get interns and different people, I'm like, go work with me for a day. Go work with our fish team for a day. Go work with the boss for a day. You won't want to be the boss. But just, when I was here as a student, we would go meet with the water board. We would go meet with agencies. We would go meet with ODOT and look at what they were doing. And so that really, throwing yourself into lots of things can figure out where it is you want to be. And you might get there and do that for 5 years and go, this is not where I want to be, and pivot. But I think, and then in the job, like the reason I was still around is because I didn't know how to do everything. But if there was a survey, I'm like, teach me, I'll figure it out. I'll do this. I'm doing road surveys for this bit. I'm doing stream surveys. So just being willing to learn the other stuff that you don't know or that isn't necessarily your expertise, because you're only going to expand what you're doing and your knowledge base, right? That's what we're all here for, I think, is challenging ourselves a little bit.
I think if you're passionate about something and you really want to do something, go after it. I didn't get into firefighting because I wanted to be rich. I got into it because I liked fighting fire. Every day was something new, and I like that about my job. So there's many different aspects, I think, of forestry, not just logging or firefighting. There's, the stream surveys, the fish, the wildlife, the logging, the harvest, all sorts of stuff. So I don't think it's just clear cut of what you can do in forestry. And there's a lot of different agencies out there that you can work for. So exploring all those different opportunities, whether it's a timber company, CFPA, ODF, Forest Service, BLM, there's all sorts of opportunities out there, and depending on what you want to do. So I think if you're passionate about something, chase it.
Yeah, I'd say, when you're looking for those summer jobs or part-time positions, just cast a wide net and find something you like. I've, fought fire during the summer. I've done timber sale layout and ultimately ended up doing silviculture forestry stuff. So, you'll end up finding what you enjoy the most, but, without trying different things, you'll never know what you really like.
Yeah, thank you all for humoring me on this last little question. So can we please thank our panel here for giving us their time? We really appreciate it. And yeah, that's a wrap, folks. Thank you all for coming. So we if you guys are okay with it, yeah, okay.
You were planning on doing that?
Well, we weren't sure if we'd kind of ran out of time, but sure, we can, yeah, that's all right. We can take a question.
That'd be a good question.
Yeah, please.
We want to talk about conservation, climate change. Surprises me that you don't mention oak growth forest. The Weyerhaeuser guy mentioned habitat for murrelet, so I take it you're maintaining some oak growth. But that's sad. That's sad. The fact that we only have approximately 5% of old growth left, it's kind of illustrated by y'all not mentioning old growth.
I think maybe it's hard because those stands of timber, and I'm not the harvester type, but are kind of off limits. So it's not, we did a lot of that 50, 60, 80, 100 years ago. And like you say, there's this little sliver of it left. And maybe I'm speaking for these guys, but it seems like those areas have been set aside based on previous Forest Practices Act and even more stringent private forest accord stuff in the last little bit. And so maybe sometimes we forget to talk about them because as it talks about active harvest or restoration, I know when I'm looking for logs in the creek, I can't put certain logs. I can't touch that one or that one. And so maybe we gloss over it because of that, because we're not allowed to.
The old growth was off limits as much as you described, but it's not. And it's going to be much less so with Mr. Trump wanting us to ramp up maximum logging. And what's BLM doing? Why isn't BLM here tonight? Apparently, they are going to go maximum. Cut everything. That's what I've been hearing. Is that what y'all have been hearing about BLM?
I mean, I think that it's out there right now, and that who knows what that'll look like. I know they're working on their environmental impact statements, and that's going to supposedly it's supposed to be out in 1 year. But those of us that have to do that at that level, those are 500 and 600 and 800-page documents that don't get drafted in 12 months. So I don't know. I can't speak on the political side of it. I just know that from us as practitioners, I know that Elliott has some stuff on the west side of the 2000 road that as we were setting things up was like, well, we can't really get into this. We can't do that. Some of the sizing of the trees that you guys do have access to was based on that, in 2020, what was it, 75-year age class? That anything bigger than that, or 65? So yeah, I think it's easy maybe for us to forget because it's been things that we can't touch. At least I know from my world of trying to get trees and put them in the creek. It's surprising how many of those I can't touch. So
I love old growth forests. There aren't many of them left, unfortunately. I wish there were. I so wish they were. They're just magical places to be walking through and being in. Yeah. Yes. Right. But I think more and more, I got into this profession starting off thinking that I would become a wildlife biologist. I would do research and I would stop clear cuts and I would, be somebody that gums up timber harvesting to protect wildlife, to protect biodiversity. And like one of my first seasonal job was working for a private industrial timber company. And I never would have imagined that that's what I would have been doing. And it was really eye-opening to me. And I think it was the best experience for me developing as a conservation biologist, as a wildlife manager, to see the care that people inside these companies have. I just made wild assumptions about the people that would work for a company like that. And I think there are so many just pivotal experiences for me working there. I went back and worked 3 seasons there, and they helped develop me. They had helped send me to grad school. But I think just one of the experiences, we were butting up right next to Redwood National Park, some of the most amazing trees you could ever find yourself in. The only northern spotted owls that Redwood National Park could claim as being part of their park were nesting on this private industrial timber company's lands because they were managing barred owls on their lands. I mean, barred owls had just decimated spotted owls in Redwood National Park. So we can't just say like, oh, there's old growth, we're not going to touch it, and assume that everything's going to be fine for biodiversity. Like we're far beyond that. No, I don't know that we were ever at a point like that. Like I think more and more about how the native peoples managed the landscapes and these forests, and what we think of as old growth. I mean, I used to have this concept of old growth as just forests that were old, they had never been touched, but like the people who had lived here since time immemorial actively managed and manipulated these forests. And then we pulled them, I say we as the European Americans, literally just pulled them out of these forests, and these forests were no longer being managed or influenced or manipulated in any way where they had been intensively managed. And I could probably talk on and on all night about this, but my fellow panelists probably want to go home at some point, but happy to talk with you more afterwards.
I guess just final thoughts on this. So South Slough Reserve doesn't unfortunately have any old growth forests in the reserve. We have older forests. And so what we manage there at the reserve is accelerating ecological function in our forest to get to those old growth conditions quicker. And we cannot speed up the time, you know, to get those trees to grow big and large and have the functionality of those old growth forests. But the way that we manage it, and we've started to manage it, I should say, because we've just started a watershed scale restoration project, was to bring in some of that ecological function and that complexity that will allow that dense regrowth forest to get there quicker. And so unfortunately, can't turn back time on the South Slough Reserve and what was clear cut there. And we kind of appreciate our older stands of forest. And then we are trying to be responsible stewards and try and accelerate that progression towards old growth in the future. That's what we can do.
Yeah, and some of these old growth stands, like the Forest Service has these wilderness areas, right? Everybody's, we got a few around here, the Kalmiopsis, the Grassy Knob, Devil's Staircase is a new one up there out of Reedsport. And as firefighters on these, old growth stands or second growth stands that we have left, we try to be mindful of that. We have an acronym we call MIST, which is Minimal Impact Suppression Tactics. So we take that into consideration as well. Instead of dropping a dozer, a D6 down a ridge line, maybe we put a hand crew and minimize our impact on the landscape. So there's not a huge footprint that we leave behind in those areas as well. So that's one thing we do.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for taking the question, and thank you for giving us a question. These discussions are really important, and so I appreciate it.
In the absence of logging, in the absence of, or in the presence of fire suppression, are old growth forests helping?
It's a loaded question.
We'll have a quick answer. This is the last question.
I think in fire suppression, I can speak to that. There's pros and cons, right? To a managed forest versus an unmanaged forest. I think there's, in a managed forest, there's a lot less diseased trees, a lot less snags, cat-faced trees, get removed a lot more in a managed forest versus in a unmanaged forest like a wilderness. So as a firefighter, maybe the fire intensity is a little less in an unmanaged forest versus like a continuous dominant stand of trees. But I think it poses a lot more safety concerns for firefighters being in those conditions around those more rotten, weaker trees. A lot of those big Doug firs have a lot of rot in them. They have dead tops. You know, they've been struck by lightning or survived a fire before. So they're not what they once were, even though they are great and beautiful to look at. I think as a firefighter, there's some challenges there. We try to mitigate them the best we can. Whether we take a wide berth around a big snag and leave it, or try to get really tight into the black and minimize our footprint. It's case by case dependent, you know, situation based. So that's what I got on a fire standpoint. You guys want to chime in?
Yeah.
Hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, thank you guys. If anybody has other questions afterwards, I'm happy to hang out and chat. I'm gonna let these guys get home though. But yeah, thank you all for coming. We really appreciate it. And hopefully in the future, we'll be able to do some more community type events. Yeah, thank you guys.
No.
Well done. Thank you all for being here. It's great. And I've yet to find the old road in Elliott.
Yeah,
It's named for somebody now, right? It used to be like.
The cherry traps.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. My colleagues took me out there, my first trip out there.
Yeah.